a lot about troubles. You have to get your diversity right. Your odds of lasting a few decades as a firm are poor anyway. And if you think about your narrow interests in developing new innovations, you can destroy an entire industry for the next generation. Those troubles pretty much sum up the Survive and Thrive book. It's a book about troubles. But it's not a book where we say that just because there are troubles, there isn't some way around it. And it's not a book where we do this trick that often academics do to get people to listen to them at cocktail parties. And the trick is this. You go to somebody where you're trying to make conversation and about what you do, and you say something like, you know, a new innovation comes along and it's doing something that you can't currently do in your company. Should you go and ask your customers whether you should pursue it? And the person's response, well, that sounds sensible. And you go, wrong. You're wrong. I'll tell you why. Or you're organizing your company for innovation, and what you want to do is have your teams be able to, the engineers be able to operate without any meddling coming in from head office, from someone else. That's what you should do. Is that what you think you should do? And he said, well, not meddling, that sounds good. And you go, wrong. You're doomed if you follow that. And here's why. Now, that's a very effective tool to get someone's attention. But the problem is that it leads you to a set of thinking about the troubles, what causes them, and the solution, as there's a one-size-fits-all result for all of that. And in no place over the past 20 years has this occurred more than in the literature and the business press concerning disruption. Okay? Disruption used to be actually a bad word. Disruption is not something you wanted your kids to be, for example. But it has evolved into a good word. You want your teams to be disruptive. You want to think disruptive thoughts, as if that will lead to the future being well. And the reason that that mindset has come into place is because of a particular phenomena. And that is where firms didn't fail because of poor management, poor circumstances, or something like that. Firms who were really, really successful at the top of their game failed because they continued to do the very things that made them successful in the first place. And so we have lots of examples of that. We have lots of examples where firms have done that. You know, we have heard already about Kodak. You could also think about examples such as Blockbuster Video, Encyclopedia Britannica, even BlackBerry. There's a book, The Rise and Fall of BlackBerry, and for so long, BlackBerry was seeming everything was going right for it. But then the issue becomes oh wow, if I do everything right, I could still go wrong. Well, even if I feel I'm managing my business well, that puts me in quite the dilemma. And part of the issue there is, yes, there are cases at which staying the course has turned out to be a bad move for companies. But what the discussion that I have in the book is about the situations at which people have managed their way out of it, where things that might have otherwise been disruptive, things that came out of nowhere and had a very fast trajectory of improvement, and they weren't occurring in your business, didn't end up killing the business. And it's all about insurance. Every good accessible management text needs a 2x2. Here is one that you can enjoy in the book if you so choose. Of course, like every 2x2, it's a falsehood. It's really about shades of grey. But in the book, we talk about two types of disruption, places disruption can come from. One is demand-side disruption, and that is where your customer, some new technology comes along, your customers aren't very interested in it, but they are interested in potentially the future version of that product. And so if you ask your customers now without them understanding where that could lead, you might get the wrong answers. Supply-side disruption is a little bit different. Supply-side disruption is the thing that felled BlackBerry. Supply-side disruption is where a new innovation comes in and it requires such a complete rethink of how you organize yourself for innovation that it's very hard for an established firm to do it. So a firm like BlackBerry that had spent a lot of resources making the keyboard great, the radio great, remember BlackBerries could make phone calls, and being a great experience, remember that BlackBerries were so useful that a candidate for President of the United States risked that entire election on the basis of wanting to continue to use a BlackBerry. Okay? These are very powerful products. Yet, a new innovation comes along in the form of, we now call it a smartphone, but it was initially the iPhone, which just did everything different. It had a different integration of hardware and software. It had a different model in terms of where it could go in terms of the computer. And so it was hard for BlackBerry to adjust to that. And understandably so. It was very good at what it did, and to adjust for that would mean essentially blowing up the organization and then becoming one of the crowd in the smartphone mix. It's not clear that that was the right decision, even though it led to where they were today. So we have these two forms of disruption, and we have two approaches by which you can reduce the risk of that disruption hitting your organization. One set of approaches is a reactive approach. That is to wait and see. There's a great reason to wait and see and not jump on the next new thing. And we're seeing this at the moment with AI. And that is, we don't know how it's going to pan out. The issue when you've got a successfully managed firm and things are going well, and I tell you there's a new technology that only has a 10 or 20% chance of being the next big thing, are those the odds you're going to take to muck up your entire business? It's not rational. What is rational is to wait and see. And so there are firms that do that. When faced with demand-side disruption, they've waited and seen, and what they do is they ramp up at the time. Okay, we made a mistake, let's change course. They pour resources into it. Or alternatively, they engage in acquisition. That entrant was doing very well, we'll buy it. Okay, we'll buy that entrant. Think about Facebook and Instagram. Facebook now buy disruptive entrants before anyone's heard of them anymore. They did just the other week, paid some $100 million for TBH, which was only a couple of weeks on the top of the App Store. The other way to react is, of course, it's very rare for a new innovation to take out your whole business. Chances are you've got something else that's valuable. And that buys you time as well. That buys you time to reorganize. That buys you time to potentially adopt a new innovation. You can leverage your complementary assets. The other way, if you don't want to wait and see, if you don't want to feel the board heat at the time, because this isn't fun, putting out fires, which is essentially what's occurring, but it does occur, and it has been successful, is to do something before the case. That is to take out some insurance. Now, what's interesting about that is between demand-side disruption and supply-side disruption, there are two completely different and fundamentally opposed ways of taking out insurance. For demand-side disruption, which was put forward by Clay Christensen, the way to avoid that sort of disruption, when your customers aren't going to tell you what you want, what you do, you should set up a separate business unit and disrupt yourself first. you should pursue independence. Get away from the things that are causing you not to adopt. Seems logically sensible, although there is an issue. How independent can you be if you're still part of the same firm? For supply side disruption, remember that was the one where you had to reorganize everything internally to be an innovator on the new technology. The way to avoid getting into the hole of not being able to do that is by getting tighter integration. Should we leave those engineers free of any meddling? No. I know it's going to annoy them. It's probably going to slow them down in what they do. But we've got to keep the different parts of the organization talking to each other, because if a new technology comes along and we require them all to change, we can't have them all in their silos or their precious domains holding it up. And that was the message that came from the research of Rebecca Henderson, who was at Harvard Business School. Around the same time as Christensen, but didn't have the same popular effect. And we've seen examples of all of these things. Okay? In terms of ramping up after the effect, Microsoft in response to Netscape. In relation to acquiring, Seagate in hard disk drives. It didn't fall by the wayside like so many firms did in that industry. Instead, it acquired all those firms. In complementary assets, Mergenthaler, you haven't heard of that. They've been around for 150 years or more. They survived 4 successive waves of innovation in the typesetting industry. Why? Because they held the fonts. They held the ownership of the fonts, including the famous Helvetica, of which the font is displayed here. There are not many examples where independence has been proved successful. One example that Clay Christensen highlighted was Quantum Corporation. But generally speaking, that's something people have distanced away from these days. And Rebecca Henderson identified the firm Canon in the photolithographic alignment equipment industry. If you wonder what that is to do with making semiconductors and microprocessors, as being number 2 all the time. There were other firms that were number 1, but they were number 1 for a single generation, but Canon survived them all. Now, there are various strategies you can use to think about all those things. The purpose of this is to open your mind and say, yes, disruption can occur, but also, yes, it can be managed. Thanks.